Change ringing is the art of ringing a set of tuned bells in a series of mathematical patterns called changes. Change ringing differs from many other forms of campanology, in that players make no attempt to produce a conventional melody, but instead ring the bells in a set of permutations. Today, change ringing can be found all over the world, performed in a variety of media, but it remains most popular in English churches, where it was developed in the 17th century. Such a church's bell tower typically contains a set of a few large church bells, known as a ring of bells, rigged to swing freely for slightly more than one revolution. The considerable inertias involved mean that each bell usually requires its own ringer and can only speak about once every 2 seconds, the time for a full revolution. Change ringing is also performed on handbells and on carillons, though both of these instruments more commonly play melodies. Mechanics. Today, some towers have as many as 16 bells that can be rung together, though 6 or 8 bells are more common. The highest pitch bell is known as the treble, and the lowest is the tenor. For convenience, the bells are referred to by number, with the treble being number 1 and the other bells numbered by their pitch, 2, 3, 4, etc., sequentially down the scale. The bells are usually tuned to a diatonic major scale, with the tenor bell being the tonic note of the scale. Some towers contain additional bells so that different subsets of the full number can be rung, still to a diatonic scale. For instance, many 12-bell towers have a flat sixth, which if rung instead of the normal number 6 bell allows 2 to 9 to be rung as light diatonic octave. Other variations are also possible. The bells in a tower reside in the bell chamber or belfry, usually with louvered windows to enable the sound to escape. The bells are mounted within a bell frame of steel or wood. Each bell is suspended from a headstock fitted on trunnions mounted to the belfry framework so that the bell assembly may rotate. When stationary in the down position, the center of mass of the bell and clapper is appreciably below the center line of the trunnion supports, thus giving a pendulous effect to the assembly, and this dynamic is controlled by the ringer's rope. The headstock is fitted with a wooden stay, which, in conjunction with a slider, limits maximum rotational movement to a little less than 370 degrees. To the headstock a large wooden wheel is fitted into which a rope is attached. The rope wraps and unwraps as the bell rotates backwards and forwards. This is full circle ringing and quite different from fixed or limited motion bells, which chime. Within the bell the clapper is constrained to swing in the direction that the bell swings. The clapper is a rigid steel or wrought iron bar with a large ball to strike the bell. The thickest part of the mouth of bell is called the sound bow, and it is against this that the ball strikes. Beyond the ball is a flight, which controls the speed of the clapper. In very small bells this can be nearly as long as the rest of the clapper. Below the bell chamber there may be one or more sound chambers, and through which the rope passes before it drops into the ringing chamber or room. Typically, the rope's length is such that it falls close to or onto the floor of the ringing chamber, about 5 feet from the floor. The rope has a woolen grip called the sally long, while the lower end of the rope is doubled over to form an easily held tail end. Unattended bells are normally left hanging in the normal position, but prior to being rung, the bells are rung up. In the down position, the bells are safe if a person touches them or pulls a rope. A bell that is up is dangerous to be near, and only expert ringers should ever contemplate entering a bell chamber or touching a rope when the bells are up. The ringer pulls on the rope and starts the bell swinging. Each time the bell swings, the ringer adds a little more energy to the system, similar to pushing a child's swing. Eventually there is enough energy for the bell to swing right up and be left over center just beyond the balance point with the stay resting against the slider. Bell ringers typically stand in a circle around the ringing chamber, each managing one rope. Bells and their attendant ropes are so mounted that the ropes are pulled in a circular sequence, usually clockwise, starting with the lightest bell and descending to the heaviest. To ring the bell, the ringer first pulls the sally towards the floor, upsetting the bell's balance and swinging it on its bearings. As the bell swings downwards, the rope unwinds from the wheel and the ringer adds enough pull to counteract friction and air resistance. The bell winds the rope back onto the other side of the wheel as it rises, and the ringer can slow the rise of the bell if required. The rope is attached to one side of the wheel so that a different amount of rope is wound on and off as it swings to and fro. The first stroke is the hand stroke with a small amount of rope on the wheel. The ringer pulls on the sally, and when the bell swings up it draws up more rope onto the wheel and the sally rises to, or beyond, the ceiling. The ringer keeps hold of the tail end of the rope to control the bell. After a controlled pause with the bell on or close to its balancing point, the ringer rings the backstroke by pulling the tail end, causing the bell to swing back towards its starting position. As the sally rises, the ringer catches it to pause the bell at its balance position. In English-style ringing, the bell is rung up such that the clapper is resting on the lower edge of the bell when the bell is on the stay. During each swing, the clapper travels faster than the bell, eventually striking the sound bow and making the bell sound. The bell speaks roughly when horizontal as it rises, thus projecting the sound outwards. The clapper rebounds very slightly, allowing the bell to ring. At the balance point, the clapper passes over the top and rests against the sound bow. In change ringing, where the order the bells are struck in is constantly altered, it is necessary to time the swing so that this strike occurs with precise positioning within the overall pattern. Precision of striking is important at all times. To ring quickly, the bell must not completed the full 360 degrees before swinging back in the opposite direction. While ringing slowly, the ringer waits with the bell held at the balance, before allowing it to swing back. To achieve this, the ringer must work with the bell's momentum, applying just the right amount of effort during the pull that the bell swings as far as required and no further. This allows two adjacent bells to reverse positions, the quicker bell passing the slower bell to establish a new pattern. Although ringing up certainly involves some physical exertion, actual ringing should rely more on practiced skill than mere brute force. Even the smallest bell in a tower is much heavier than the person ringing it. The heaviest bell hung for full circle ringing is in Liverpool Cathedral and weighs 82 long CWT0QR 11 pounds. Despite this colossal weight, it can be safely rung by one ringer. Handbells change ringing can also be carried out on handbells. This was particularly common during the Second World War, when church bells often were not allowed to be rung. Though the ringers returned to the towers as soon as the war was over, for a number of years thereafter handbell ringing remained popular. When used for practice by tower ringers, each ringer typically handles one bell, just as in the tower. But change ringing on handbells is today quite popular in its own right, and in that context the relevant physical realities of handbells have their effect. On handbells, each ringer usually handles two bells. Likewise, a set of handbells often contains considerably more bells than towers ever do, sometimes several octaves worth. Today many record-length peals, including the longest peal ever rung, come from handbell ringers. Typically, change ringers using handbells sit or stand in a circle. The tower bell terms of handstroke and backstroke are retained, referring to an upwards and downwards ring of the bell respectively, and as in towers, the ringing proceeds in alternate rows of handstroke and backstroke. There is, however, a second school of change ringing on handbells, which uses a technique called lapping, or cross and stretch. Ringers stand or sit in a straight line at a single convenient table on which the bells are placed. They pick up a bell each time they ring it, and then put it down. As the bell sequence changes, however, the ringers physically swap the bells accordingly, so the bells move up and down the table and each row is rung in strict sequence from right to left. Ringers in cross and stretch thus do not have responsibility for their own personal bell, but handle each as it comes. Some handbell change ringers practice a hybrid of these two methods, known as body ringing. Ringers standing in a line each hold one bell, exchanging places in the line so that the changes sound correctly when the bells are rung in sequence from right to left. Permuting the bells. The simplest way to use a set of bells is ringing rounds, which is sounding the bells repeatedly in sequence from treble to tenor, 1, 2, 3, etc. Ringers typically start with rounds and then begin to vary the bell's order, moving on to a series of distinct rows. Each row is a specific permutation of the bells, that is to say, it includes each bell rung once and only once. The difference from row to row being the order of the bells. In call change ringing, each row is specifically called for. One ringer tells the others how to swap their bells' places from row. In method ringing, by contrast, the ringers have learned a method, an algorithm that governs the swaps they can thus perform on their own like clockwork. A conductor's intervention is needed only periodically, when a slight variation in the pattern is necessary, or to correct errors. Call change ringing. Most ringers began their ringing career with call change ringing. They can thus concentrate on learning the physical skills needed to handle their bells without needing to worry about methods. There are also many towers where experienced ringers practice call change ringing as an art in its own right. Particularly in the English county of Devon. Calls are made with spoken commands such as X to Y, or X and Y, or X after Y, in which X and Y refer to two of the bells by their numbers. Such a call signifies that after the call, a pair of bells will have swapped, resulting in X following Y. However, there are several different ways of representing any given change. By far the most common two are known as calling up and calling down. Each has its merits and inconveniences, but generally any given tower consistently uses one system in preference to the other. As an example, consider the following sequence of rows, and the calls a conductor would use to evoke them. Thus it can be seen how these two ways of calling differ. In calling up, the two bells named are already neighbors in the row, with the second name previously following the first named. As a result of the call, these two bells swap position. Thereafter the first named bell follows its erstwhile successor to a position nearer the end of the change. The second named has meanwhile moved downwards to a position nearer the start of the change. In short, the call literally consists of an instruction that the first named bell move up. In calling down, by contrast, the first named bell is instructed to move down. The second bell named, the one the first named bell is to follow, does not alter its place in the row. It still immediately precedes the swapping pair. The bell that swaps with the one moving down towards lead, on the other hand, is not itself named. Its ringer must simply realize that the bell must move up to accommodate the first named bell. In both cases, the ringer of the bell immediately above the swapping pair must also be alert, as this bell follows a new bell after the swap. Rarer forms of change calling may name just one of the moving bells, call the moving bell by position rather than number, or call out the full change. Method ringing. Method ringing is what many people mean by change ringing. Thanks to it, ringers can spend hours ringing thousands upon thousands of unique changes with no outside direction or coordination. They do not have to memorize impossible quantities of data, nor do they attempt to read it all off a lengthy sheet of numbers. Rather, they are all following a method, a relatively simple pattern they have learned to direct them from row to row. Where the treble bell follows exactly the same pattern as the other bells, it is called a principal. Since a ringer is responsible for one bell, learning a method consists mainly of memorizing how that bell changes position from row to row, when it advances towards the beginning or when it retreats towards the end. Often ringers study a blue line, a graphical representation of a bell's course from row to row according to a particular method. The methods are simple enough to memorize and so are relatively limited in length, but taken in conjunction with slight standard variations the ringers know to make at regular breaking points, a more robust algorithm is formed. From time to time, and usually when the treble is leading, a conductor calls out the need for another variation by calling bob or single. For some people, the ultimate goal of this system is to ring all the permutations, to ring a tower's bells in every possible order without repeating, what is called an extent. The feasibility of this depends on how many bells are involved. If a tower has bells, they have possible permutations, a number that becomes quite large as grows. For example, while 6 bells have 720 permutations, 8 bells have 40,320. Furthermore, 10 equals 3,628,800, and 12 equals 479,001,600. Estimating 2 seconds for each change, we find that while an extent on 6 bells can be accomplished in half an hour, a full peal on 8 bells should take nearly 22.5 hours. An extent on 12 bells would take over 30 years. Since extents are obviously not always practicable, ringers more often undertake shorter performances. Such ringing starts and ends with rounds. Having meanwhile visited only a subset of the available permutations, but truth is still considered essential. No row can ever be repeated. To do so would make the ringing false. A peal is an extended performance. It must last at least 5,000 changes on 8 or more bells and at least 5,040 on 7 or fewer bells. A performance of 1250 or 1260 changes likewise makes a quarter peal. A peal or a quarter tends to last about 3 hours or 45 minutes, respectively. Half muffling for commemorative services such as funerals, memorial services and Remembrance Sunday. The bells are rung half muffled. To ring half muffled, a thick leather pad called a muffle is strapped to one side of each bell's clapper. This deadens the sound of alternate strokes of the bells, the muffled stroke sounding similar to an echo of the unmuffled stroke. In some areas the tenor bell is left unmuffled to heighten the contrast. Very rarely, normally only for the death of a sovereign, are the bells rung fully muffled. One notable exception to this tradition was when Nurse Edith Cavell's remains were repatriated after the First World War. As the ship bearing the coffin arrived in Dover, a full peal of grandsire triples was rung on the bells of the parish church. The peal record shows rung with the bells deeply muffled with the exception of the tenor, which was open at backstroke, in token of respect to Nurse Cavell, whose body arrived at Dover during the ringing and rested in the town till the following morning. The ringers of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are ex-soldiers, Eliot having been 8 months prisoner of war in Germany.